بسم الله، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله، وأهلا بكم في هذه الحلقة الرابعة من سلسلة الأسرار الخفية للمال، وهي سلسلة مهمة نشرنا منها الحلقة الأولى والثانية، تخطينا الثالثة وننشر اليوم هذه الحلقة الرابعة بعنوان أزمة البنوك والتضخم، أكبر عملية احتيال في تاريخ البشرية. السبب في إذاعة الحلقة هذه الآن هو خبر موافقة الكونغرس مع الرئاسة الأمريكية على رفع سقف الدين الأمريكي مرة أخرى بعد أن وصل دين الحكومة الأمريكية للسقف المقرر سلفا، وهو حوالي 33 تريليون دولار، وهي الآن مديونية الحكومة. فالحكومة كانت لا تستطيع الاستمرار بدون رفع هذا السقف، لأن الاقتراض المستمر من هذه العملة هو الذي يمد الحكومة بالمال اللازم لمواصلة الاستمرار في العمل وتسديد الديون. لأن هذه الحلقة تتحدث عن سقف الدين وكيف أنه يجب أن يتم رفعه باستمرار ليستمر اقتراض الحكومة الأمريكية، وإلا ستفلس وتعجز عن دفع أقساط الدين أو بالأحرى الفوائد، وعلى تمويل العجز في الميزانية. وهذا يبين بوضوح كيف أن الحكومة الأمريكية مفلسة، وأنه لولا الاقتراض المستمر من هذه الأوراق التي يطبعها البنك المركزي من الهواء لأعلنت الحكومة إفلاسها. وهو ما حذرت منه صراحة وزيرة الخزانة الأمريكية مرارا وتكرارا خلال هذه الأزمة، وهو ما سيحدث في المستقبل ولا شك مع سقوط هذا النظام النقدي الاحتيالي، لأن المحرك الأساسي لهذا النظام النقدي هو الفائدة الربوية التي هي وسيلة السرقة، وهي الحافز للبنوك على دعم هذا النظام ومحاولة إبقائه أطول فترة ممكنة. لكنه سيسقط في النهاية حتما كما يقول الفيلم، مصداقا لقوله تعالى: يمحق الله الربا ويربي الصدقات. الحلقة متعلقة أيضا بعملية طباعة العملة في البنك المركزي وإقراضه للحكومات والشركات والأفراد عبر البنوك الوسيطة، وكيف تستخدم هذه العملية لسرقة الشعوب والحكومات ونقل الثروة من الشعوب والأفراد لخزائن أصحاب البنوك. ولهذا سميت الحلقة بأنها أكبر عملية احتيال في التاريخ، وهذه حقيقة، لأن السرقة هنا تحدث من أي شخص في العالم يستخدم العملات الورقية أو الحسابات البنكية. ولكن لا يفهم هذه العملية إلا 1 في المليون كما قلنا دائما وكما قال هو في هذه الحلقة. أيضا تتعرض الحلقة لما يسمى بالنظام المصرفي الكسري، وهو الذي يمكن البنوك من إقراض الناس أكثر من الأصول المملوكة للبنك، وهذا ما شرحناه في فيلمنا الوثائقي سرقة البشرية.
دعني أتحكم في أموال الأمة ولا يهمني من يضع قوانينها. يملكون البنوك المركزية حول العالم، لهم الحق الحصري لإصدار النقود، يقرضون كل ورقة نقد بالربا، يفرضون الضرائب للاستيلاء على الأموال، يتسببون في التضخم بإضعاف قيمة العملات، يهندسون الأزمات المالية لإفلاس البنوك والشركات، وينهبون ثروات الأرض.
لن أطيل عليكم، لكن شاهد الحلقة وكرر مشاهدتها عدة مرات لتفهم الموضوع بعمقه، فهذا الأمر يخفى حتى على كثير من خبراء الاقتصاد ولا يعرفه إلا القليل منهم، وهو صعب الاستيعاب لأنه مؤامرة حقيقية تتواطأ فيها الحكومات مع المصرفيين على الشعوب، لذا فإنه يصعب على الكثير تصديقها رغم أنها تحدث أمامه، وترى أثرها في إفقار الشعوب وغلاء الأسعار والتضخم وسرقة أعمار الناس عبر خدعة هي الأعظم في التاريخ. أترككم مع الحلقة.
You are about to learn one of the biggest secrets in the history of the world. It's a secret that has huge effects for everyone who lives on this planet. Most people can feel deep down that something isn't quite right with the world economy, but few know what it is. Gone are the days where a family can survive on just one paycheck. Every day it seems things are more and more out of control, yet only 1 in a million understand why. You are about to discover the system that is ultimately responsible for most of the inequality in our world today. The powers that be do not want you to know about this, as this system is what has kept them at the top of the financial food chain for the last 100 years. Learning this will change your life because it'll change the choices that you make. If enough people learn it, it'll change the world because it'll change the system. For this is the biggest hidden secret of money. Never in human history have so many been plundered by so few, and it's all accomplished through this, the biggest scam in the history of mankind. They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, "Vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will." But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, "Loan me $1 trillion today, and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest." But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, "Here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up." Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, "Hey, thanks for that." And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play.